blah. Okay, we're live. There you go. Hello, everyone. Good day, and thank you for joining us as we explore this timely and really pressing challenge that many of us face as leaders, which is, of course, navigating post-election uncertainty within our teams and organizations. We've got an incredible panel today of 4 dynamic leaders with extensive backgrounds, ranging from DEIB strategy and authentic leadership to managing culture in hierarchical sectors and transforming workplace conflict into opportunity. Each of these panelists brings a unique perspective that I believe will empower us to lead with both courage and empathy in what can be some potentially challenging times. My name is Darren Bridget. I'm the Chief Learning Architect here at LearnIt. Today's session is going to be about 45 minutes long with 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. We prepared some great questions for our panelists around 4 key areas. Those are emotional intelligence, managing political tension, building trust amidst uncertainty, and handling high emotions. I'll be monitoring your engagement through chat, so please chime in wherever you are. We'll be collecting those questions for Q&A at the end. We have about 10 minutes there. Before we dive in, I want to do a proper introduction of each of our panelists here. Dov Baron is a speaker, facilitator, podcast host of the Dov Baron Show, and best-selling author of the books Fiercely Loyal and One Red Thread. He specializes in creating cultures of belonging, and for over 30 years has helped leaders explore their emotional source code, a concept we will get into shortly. Dov's been named a top 30 global leadership guru and a top leadership speaker by Inc. magazine. We got a little bit of background noise. Maybe for right now, just like stay on mute if you don't mind. Brian Lanier is the CEO of the Leader Circle, a 21-year-old leadership consultancy. He has been a regional VP at Starbucks, KFC, and currently serves on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce in Calgary, Canada. As a former chairperson of a Black advocacy group, Brian played a key role raising over $300,000 for youth scholarships. Brian is also a colleague of mine who leads all of our diversity and inclusion programs at LearnIt. Leslie Neidick is an expert in conflict resolution, negotiation, and communication. She is the host of Let's Talk About It podcast and author of the Strats blog, as well as the founder of The Conflict Strategist, an organization that provides customized solutions to empower teams to approach conflict with confidence. She is an adjunct faculty member at New York University and deeply involved in shaping how we can better communicate in an open and inclusive business environment. Michelle Lau Torres is a transformative leader in organizational and performance development with over 20 years of experience in designing talent and engagement programs, and the author of Point Taken: Brilliant Advice from Women at the Top. She currently serves as Deputy Chief Learning Officer for the City of Austin. She has consulted for organizations like the U.S. Air Force, is a certified Texas Commission on Law Enforcement instructor, and a DISC practitioner. Again, our 4 topics are emotional intelligence, managing political tension, building trust amidst uncertainty, and handling high emotions. Dov, we're going to start with you. I've been learning a lot about the emotional source code you created, and you emphasize understanding one's emotional source code as critical for effective leadership. And in the context of post-election uncertainty, how can leaders use their own emotional source code to bring some sense of stability to their teams?
Oh, thanks for asking, Darren. I mean, I think that first and foremost, we got to stop and shift a couple of categories. So I don't know. I'm pretty sure, let's just go that way, that most of the people who are tuning in have read at least one article, probably a couple of books on emotional intelligence. And if you're like me, which you might not be, you've met a lot of emotionally intelligent people who've studied emotional intelligence who claim to be emotional intelligence experts who have the emotional intelligence of a stick. Now, of course, I'm a little direct, and I'm sure other people would be far nicer about it than I am. And so emotional intelligence is the nuts and bolts. But putting it into practice, particularly in self-assessment, is what creates emotional maturity and how we respond to things. When you understand yourself, which is your emotional source code, which you need to think of as your emotional DNA, you understand the meaning you give to things, you understand your own identity, which drives the beliefs and values that you uphold that drive your behavior. And a lot of the time we're trying to deal with surface stuff that is so deep that people are going to defend it with their bloody lives. And that particularly is poignant at this point in time in a post-election period for those of us who are leaders, that people are going to defend their identity with everything. And if you really want to understand this, you've got to understand your own. You got to understand where you will react like you're in a corner when you're actually not. When you're behaving like you're under threat when you're actually not. When people are very willing to have a conversation with you, depending on how you approach it. So I think that that's the first thing before we go into any depth of it, is just understanding everyone you meet. I don't care who it is, the billionaire, the person on the street, your best friend, your worst enemy. Everybody you meet is in some kind of pain. And everybody you meet is trying to feel better. Whether you voted blue or you voted red, you voted based on your level of pain and the pain you were trying to ease within yourself. And so did that other idiot who you look at and you want to judge on the other side of that aisle. So remembering that allows you to go, okay, there's something more basic here than supporting a guy with a bad hairdo or not supporting a guy with a bad hairdo who was, supporting somebody who Beyonce came out for. That's not really relevant. What's relevant is understanding that in front of you is another human being. And as I just wrote an article on LinkedIn that says, we have to make America whole again, because guess what? We can no longer other those people. We can't say, oh, those people in the red hats are all crazy. No. Take a look at the map. That person who voted for Trump is the person you don't think did. That person voted on the basis of their pain. Have some compassion for that. That's really important.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying in that sense. It's hard for us to remember, isn't it? You look at someone and you because you judge them from your point of view, and so you're not really clocking where something is coming from and how sort of deeply personal it can feel. Even though, from my perspective, it seems like, but I don't understand why that would be such a big deal. And we do that with each other all the time. So you get it for yourself, but you just don't get it for someone else.
Well, take it out of the political arena for a minute. Are you married?
Yeah.
Right. Do you have kids?
Yeah.
These people are insane. I'm married with them, right? That's what you think, right? How can I have married this lunatic in that moment? But you do love this person. You do care about them. And you do know that it's something more important than the fact of making them wrong. Because you know there's something far more in common than this disagreement.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really important to remember, that there's a person in the depth below the vote. Is this other human being. And this is why I talked about in the interview with Damon that I did, which is we've got to find out what brings us together rather than what separates us. And that is often purpose and meaning. Those two words are fairly interchangeable. But when we understand that, then we go, oh, you're not as different as me. You just approach it completely differently. That's okay. Let's find out how we can come together.
Yeah. Well, let's open this up to the panel, and maybe Michelle, you can chime in, or Brian first, and we're going to get to Leslie in just a moment too. And I think it's this idea of emotional intelligence, which can be sometimes challenging. Like, we think we're being emotionally intelligent, but we can miss it. You can miss it in yourselves, you can miss it in other people, and you kind of have to go above and beyond. So as a leader, how can you use EQ to kind of help maintain some trust and unity within teams that might be very polarized right now? And Michelle or Brian or Leslie, anyone who wants to jump in, let's just go that way. Who wants to jump in?
I'll go ahead. Thank you, everybody. I admit that I'm in a different space coming onto the podcast than I was even a week ago as we were preparing for this. So I want to start off, as I start off when I'm coaching or leading a session dealing with uncomfortable or difficult conversations, I want to start off by acknowledging what's so. So what's so is the American people voted for a president from the Republican Party. That's what's so. Now, that's different than how it occurs for me and all the emotions that come up for me. One commentator I heard on CNN said that for millions of people, they went to bed with a heart full of hope and they woke up with a head full of hate. And to make that real, I live and work in Calgary, Canada. I immigrated here, so I know what it's like to be an immigrant. I was in the United States. I was born in Washington, D.C., and then I became a Canadian. So I'm a dual citizen, if you will. And my sister lives in North Carolina. And she jokingly called me last week saying, "Hey, Brian, just in case, you have my room ready up there in Canada." And I called her the day after, and she normally picks up the phone. She wouldn't answer the phone. She sent me a text, and she said, I can't talk without crying. I'm so upset. I've got to talk to you later in the week. So, and I could share lots of other stories about people in my network, as I'm sure people could, about people that are at both ends of the spectrum. I have people in my network that are very, very excited about the outcome. I have people in my network that are crushed. So as we're having this conversation about emotional intelligence, I want to start by pointing to empathy. And that's distinct from sympathy. So don't feel sorry for those of us that might be disappointed with the result. I'm inviting us to be empathetic, to actually listen in a way and focus on how we're listening. Am I listening from a default way? I'm right, you're wrong. This is good, this is bad. It should be this way, it shouldn't be. That's the kind of listening that I do when I watch my favorite sports team, And for those moments, I don't like the other sports team. But when I'm at an event, I sit next to them. I'm wearing my jersey, they're wearing theirs. Hey, good game. But there's something a little bit more volatile about this election that I've got to be responsible for, and it starts with how we're listening. So I would invite us to keep that in mind. Real people are really impacted. Some are at the depths, can't get out of bed, crying.
Yeah.
How we're listening.
Yeah.
Conversation.
No, I taught a class just yesterday. Met some people who were kind of sniffling their way through the class with tears. So a lot of people are really affected. It's sort of like we polarized a lot beforehand because that's kind of the nature of it, right? You polarize, you dig in, you champion your side, and you kind of don't really reach out and try to understand the other side too much. But now it's the next day. And we need to come back together again. So how it's about doing those things like not othering and bringing some empathy to the table. Michelle, Leslie, anything you'd like to add around this EQ idea before we move into our next topic?
Well, I don't mind jumping in real quick.
Sure.
I know that I've got network issues at the minute as well. But I will say, so we're very quick to say it's the next day, and the next day just isn't long enough, right? And so yes, all of the things that Brian spoke about, but we need time to self-regulate. And you need time to process what's happened. And self-regulation is one of those things that's really important when you're talking about EQ. How do you self-regulate it? And that becomes like your self-awareness, right? So each one of us as leaders, as leading teams, we all have our own emotional triggers. We all have our own biases. We all have our own needs. And it's going to be really tough to take care of your team if you can't get into that self-regulation piece first. Understand your triggers and biases and understand what it is that you want from the outcomes of the conversations and the team building that you're going to be doing, right? To regenerate your group into how do we make this work in the workplace? And so I would say, yes, the next day. And I think that we're all too quick to say, okay, that was yesterday.
Yeah.
Let's power on with today. And it's like, well, hold on a second. I'm going to need a minute. Because
well, I think we got that. Sorry for the little bit of internet issues there, but yeah, absolutely. It's a shout out to let's not rush. And we all have a tendency to want to rush. It's all better. Everything's fine. Let's move on. It starts with taking care of yourself. And then one of the hardest things to do is just hold space, instead of immediately jumping in and try to fix everything. Leslie, I'm going to be coming to you for the next question, but do you have anything you'd like to add to this EQ sort of conversation?
The one thought that just came to mind, and some of it has been covered, we just need to be aware that our emotions come to the office with us. I remember when I started my career, you were theoretically it was all business. Your personal self needed to be checked at the door.
Right.
I never knew how to do that. My whole self is coming, and so is everyone's whole self is coming to the office. and we can't swipe it away. The emotions exist. So just that awareness, they're there. I don't have to fix and solve them all, but just recognize they're there and just listen more and be more curious about what someone's thinking or feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, the point is you want somebody's whole self. You can't just cut off the emotions and only get the thoughts. You need their whole self if you want a team of diverse opinions. Nice comment here from Kimberly Arnold about really that deep breathing, that parasympathetic sort of breathing as a way to help manage for yourself, in reference, I think, what Michelle was saying. Let's move into this next topic, managing political tension in teams. Now, Leslie, I've been learning about your work as a conflict strategist, which is so key when you're talking about managing political tensions. One of the things I think you talk about is this idea of helping leaders to act as first responders to workplace emotional health. What kind of guidance can you give people around this idea of being a first responder for workplace emotional health?
Sure. Well, the first thing is, here's a statistic that I saw the other day. So this was pre-election. 70% of US adults report that they're stressed out because of this election. And that was from the American Psychological Association. Yeah. So that's why, I want to share these 2 points or 2 tools to manage like emotional health. And the first one, checking in with everyone. And it's not just today. This has got to be routine. And I mean, like, ask open questions, skip that hi, how are you when it sounds like it's one word all merged together. Ask someone like, what is going well today? Or what's been a challenge? Or how can I support you? And by the way, don't ask all of those at once. One at a time. Listen to the responses. Yeah. And the checking in has got to be routine throughout the year and every year. And not just when you observe tension. When you think everything's going well, do the checking in.
Yeah.
And the second one, and maybe this is more relevant for this period of time, people need to vent. It's not just like, here's a problem, this is how we're going to solve it, and then implement it. So the venting is part of the process. And sometimes that's the solution. So just recognizing that when tension needs attention, sometimes it's not. Sometimes someone could just write an email, let it all out, they're done. Other times people need more. And it's recognizing who needs it, who doesn't, giving an opportunity to everyone, even if they're the quiet ones, even if they're the loud ones. Just because they're loud, they didn't necessarily share everything they wanted. And the quiet ones, it doesn't mean they have nothing to say. So it's back to that whole checking in and knowing your team, really getting to know people.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Checking in, making sure it really fits the people, and kind of having the courage to do it. It reminds me of that thing. It's like, hey, how you doing? Fine, good, that's great. Like, as all one phrase. Like, you really don't. It's not an invitation for people to share, have an actual conversation. But I mean, I think people are pretty anxious about allowing any sort of tension into the room right now, because like how might that affect collaboration or team morale moving forwards if I allow people to vent or I allow people room to kind of process and check in. And so let me open up that question to the rest of the folks when it comes to checking in and creating an environment where people can do that, but you're still going to point towards collaboration, working together. How do you manage that? And just whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in if you like. And that is the thing that I like to remind people of is perspective. And perspective means this: what is primary for you right now? So what's primary for me right now is I'm really upset because Trump got in, or I'm really excited because Trump got in. Okay. Right. And now I future pace. Okay. So let's go through that. Let's feel all that. Let's give space for that, because that's important, as Leslie was just saying, to just let us be with that. But now we're not going to stop there, because I'm not going to let you sit in that. Now I'm going to say to you, okay, so from a place of perspective, if you move forward 1 year from now, what's primary for you? Are you still thinking about the election? Yes, I am. At what percentage compared to today? Well, probably at 5%, 10%, whatever it might be. Okay. So what's primary for you in a year from now? Well, it's this, it's that, it's the other thing. Okay. So now let's move that out 2 years, 5 years. Where are you? What's most important to you? My guess is you're probably not thinking that much about this election. You're thinking about paying the bloody rent or buying the groceries or, you know, whether your kid's okay or, you know, whatever it is. And a lot of that might be tied to the election, but you're not going to be looking across the aisle at the person you work with and putting spells on them because they wore a certain color hat on voting day. So there's an importance, Leslie's really on it there, and it's so important. You have to allow people the space, Michelle talked about it too, to grieve the situation in whatever form that is, or celebrate the situation in whatever form that is. Create the space where people are safe to do that. But it's a false premise to allow people the space and then let them sort of marinate in their own, in their own shit. Like, we don't want to let people marinate in their own poop. No, let's not do that. Let's say, yes, there's a space for this. We need to be emotionally intelligent enough to allow people to feel, but not to perpetuate something within themselves so they become the victims of their own mentality. So let's move them forward from there. That's far more valuable. So perspective is everything. A lot of the things that before the last time Trump was elected, people said, if Trump gets elected, I'll leave the country. How many of them did?
Yeah.
Well, Brian, maybe. I don't know.
No, he had already done that.
No,
Yeah.
I know, I'm teasing. Most people didn't, right? And then a lot of people said the same thing this time, and they won't. Why? Because they love America more than they hate Trump or more than they hate the MAGA group. And that's good. That's good, because that's not the whole perspective. It's your perspective in the moment. In the perspective in the moment, you're looking at your partner, you're thinking, why the hell did I marry you? We're in this big fight. And an hour later, you're like, oh my God, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for awakening me to this nonsense I was carrying around as if it was true.
Yeah.
Like, we've got to, that's the bigger, holistic, emotionally intelligent, and understanding one's own emotional source code, our own emotional DNA of how we approach things. Nothing's permanent.
That's what gives you the confidence to hold the room, right? It's like,
Exactly.
here, let's go and experience where we are right now. But this isn't your only perspective. If you put yourself into, I love the way you basically used the future as a lever to help people expand their perspective and then point toward, but you have to do it in order. You can't just immediately rush there, which is what people
and I think that's the problem with positive psychology is people want to rush up into the future and go, oh, see, it won't matter in a year. No. Feel what you're feeling right now. That matters.
Yeah.
You have to be with the emotion now. And when you feel like, you don't have to be 100% process with it, but the majority process, you can go, okay, so let me move forward in time.
Yeah.
Am I leaving the country? You might, and that's fine. Or you might go, no, you know what? I'm going to stay here. I'm going to fight for women's rights, even though this happened. Or I'm going to fight for this, even though that happened. And there are other things that matter even more right now.
Yeah. There's actually a question in here I think I'm going to go ahead and grab right now, which is because we've been talking about managing yourself, taking the time for yourself to kind of process these things. So what do you do if you feel stuck? Like, essentially, I'm now with people that have a very opposing views from me, who are, crushed or celebrating. How do you kind of deal with when you feel the conflict inside you and you're struggling to overcome it? And it's a question for the group. Everyone wants to jump in. Leslie, you seem ready. Off you go. Yeah.
Personally, like, what someone else is feeling is about them, not me. So that's where my focus would be.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll delay what I'm dealing with as the leader, and call a friend, take a break, figure it out, and maybe expedite managing my own. But at the moment, I'm dealing with them. And they come first.
Yeah.
The team.
Yeah. Remembering that they come first and the team comes first. And then treat yourself like a person. You still need some time to process it and some time to try to pull your own perspective forward. Be your own doctor almost, around this.
Exactly.
Well, let's move into another question here, which is building trust amidst uncertainty. And this chance to get Brian teed up here. We've been able to work together for a while, Brian. And one of the things that I recall you saying is this idea of being instead of just doing. Can you talk a little bit about how that fits into building trust in our workplaces amidst this uncertainty, this idea of being and not just doing?
Yeah, well, what I'm going to talk about, I know the overall topic is talking about the post-election uncertainty, and what I'm going to offer is applicable anywhere. It has to do with a particular mindset and where you're coming from. Having been a vice president with large corporations and having owned my own business and worked with scores of leaders in various industries, I find that my pull and a lot of other A-type personalities pull is to go in and do things. You got to get things done. I had many promotions because Brian was the guy that got things done. However, when I got my 360-degree feedback, I would leave, metaphorically speaking, dead bodies in the wake. I wouldn't care about my relationships. I'm bigger and better now. That was old Brian. But
I can't even picture that, Brian, knowing you.
It still shows up. So I'm shifting my focus to ways of being. And we don't have the time to get into it. I'm not plugging a book, but if any of the readers want to find out a little bit more about what I'm talking about, one of our colleagues wrote the book, The 3 Laws of Performance, that gets it a lot more into what I'm touching on. So we focus on who you're being gives you your actions and your behaviors. When something bad happens, knee-jerk reaction, I'm going to be angry, and I'll do the actions and have the behaviors consistent with someone who's being angry. If I can catch myself and actually say, being angry in this moment is not going to serve what I'm committed to, then I can shift my way of being empathetic. And as a way of being, I can take on new behaviors. And it just goes with anything. Just look at your own behavior. If you're upset, you'll take the actions consistent with someone upset. If you're being confident, you'll take the action consistent with someone being confident. Can you catch yourself from going to the knee-jerk reaction and then slow down? And it's more of a practice. I'll say one more thing, and then I'll give others an opportunity to pipe in here. What we're offering is a practice of being an inclusive leader. It's one of the approaches we take at Learn It. And my son-in-law is a medical doctor. So he graduated from medical school, but he has a license to practice medicine. He's not a doctor expert forever. So what we're offering is, can you take on practicing being inclusive as a mindset? And then that gets into who you're being, distinct from do this, do that, memorize that, etc.
It's beautiful. Let's open up this idea to others, this idea of being versus doing, which, of course, there's so much pressure to just do all the time.
Well, we live in a hustle culture. And one of the things I wrote about after the pandemic is that what I loved about the pandemic, it was the great pause, I caused it. People call it a great recession or a great, whatever it is, great reset. But it was the great pause. It allowed people to stop. We'd all been running on that treadmill at 150 miles an hour and never getting off. And then suddenly it came to a screeching halt where we had to go, oh, what am I doing? Why am I doing that? I got a really nice car that I drive to work and I drive home again, but I never have my family in it. Oh, and I'm getting a bigger house, but I'm never there. People had this great pause. And that was away from this hustle culture of doing. And the pandemic made people stop, pause, and begin to question, what are they being? Who are they? What matters most to us? And I talked about the dangers of going back to quote unquote normal. Normal doesn't exist. Normal's whatever you got used to. That's the psychological assessment of it. It's just whatever you got used to. You were abused in your family, that was normal because that's just what you got used to. And so it's only when we have perspective that we can see things were less than normal or unhealthy or dysfunctional. And so this understanding that we need to look at, to examine, as Brian very beautifully pointed out, our state of being is vital. And so there's a lot of this, particularly now in this post-election time, where everybody feels like they've got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've got to do is you've got to be.
Yeah.
You've got to decide what bloody matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the meaning for you? And are you willing to sit with that, to be with that, and to let your life be driven by meaning as opposed to doing? Because when that happens, we can all find a way to come together. Because whether you wore a red hat in the election or a blue hat in the election, if what matters is feeding your family, let's focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let's focus on how we can come together on that without othering somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's a state of being, as Brian beautifully pointed out, and it's a state of being from this place of pause and ask, what is the meaning of what it is I'm doing? If you're doing without meaning, you're a bloody robot.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful. We got a round of applause here from the group. Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people give themselves their own space to know what it is that their values are and what it is that they mean, right? And so for me, if this is the beginning of anyone's journey on what is self-awareness and what is self-actualization and what is emotional intelligence and what does this look like and what is self-regulation, it looks like, how can you show up authentically? It's okay to just sit and be, and it's okay to be afraid, and it's okay to be scared, and it's also okay to not change your mind on certain things and issues that are important to you. What is important is that you increase your personal effectiveness with those around you and how you communicate, because every time you communicate, there's a purpose. And the purpose is we want to make sure that we're meeting the personal and practical needs of the people around us. And our personal needs are normally the same, right? We all need empathy. We all need involvement. We all need that support. But our practical needs might be a little bit different. So some people's practical needs might be food on the table, and some people's practical needs might be inclusion and feeling like they belong in a country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you show up authentically, if you show up sharing your personal experiences, if you show up being consistently transparent with who you are and what you believe, then that is a road to becoming more effective and comfortable in your own skin with what's happening in the world around us right now.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It is kind of a balance, right? Being able to be open, put your team first, but at the same time, know who you are and what you value and own it authentically. They don't need to be in opposition, but I think sometimes it feels hard for people in practice. You brought up kind of like pivoting to one of the things since we've got you here, Brian. This is a bit of a tough question, but diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. What does that look like now? In organizations, just kind of your hot take on that, I guess.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, I don't take the approach that diversity, equity, and inclusion as a label is something separate, like some separate thing one has to go and learn. I see it as a way of being as an effective leader. So as an effective leader, and I'll cite some of the research from Juliet Bork and Andrea Titus, who published a paper in Harvard Business Review called The Key to Inclusive Leadership. And they looked at 6 signature traits of being an inclusive leader. Being an inclusive leader is someone who has got a visible commitment that you want everyone's voice heard, that you operate with a sense of humility, that you're curious about other people's cultures, that you're actually ongoingly learning and growing. So if somebody wants to call that DEI as a derogatory statement, I got that. That's not where we come from when we're offering that. Having had the privilege, and it is a privilege to be accountable for up to 1,250 people back in the day, I was most effective when I remembered that it wasn't the Brian show, that it was the 15 people that were the district managers and the people that were in the stores, literally having those interactions one-on-one. And that's why we say having attention on some of the elements that we focus on in diversity and inclusion training now more than ever are critical. You know, Dob talked earlier about having people come together, having a whole America, if you will. Well, if you can see that you might have an opportunity to grow and develop and expand your capacity, take on one of our programs, do some research, read a book, do a TED Talk, like that.
So just a little quick shout out at Learn It. We're so proud and lucky to have you helping us with this work, Brian. And I think it's pretty evident why we would feel that way, which is how you answered that question. Let's move into handling high emotions in the workplace. So, Michelle, you've worked across diverse sectors, including public service and law enforcement, and sometimes these can be very highly structured environments. So sort of a curious question here is, in a post-election climate where emotions be heightened, how can managers effectively foster psychological safety within an environment that's maybe a little bit more structured? Yeah, there you go.
Good question, because psychological safety is crucial. And I think it goes back to kind of what I said earlier, right? It's modeling transparency, modeling respect, making sure that your teams, regardless of where they are in the system or what it is that they necessarily do, especially when you're talking about public service, is that your teams need to feel like they matter. It's really tough, right? It's really tough in government to say, hey, how are you doing about this election? Because more often than not, that's structured. I think it's a euphemism, right? It's structured approach equates to we don't want to shake it. We don't want to shake the leaves, and we don't want anything to come out because we don't want this disruption of emotion. And I think really what managers and organizations need to do is make sure that perspectives are respected and not punished, and give that space. And that requires conflict management. It requires conflict resolution sometimes. And it requires creating boundaries and knowing where those boundaries are in terms of your behavior. You can say what you feel, it's the manner in which you say it. You can express what you need to express, but we also have to make sure that we understand that we have goals to achieve today, and essentially we're a team, and we have shared values and shared outputs that we're responsible for. But that doesn't mean that you can't show up who you are. And if you're tired today, or you've just had enough today, a team and a leader of a team will make sure that team sacrifices for the need and the good of the person or people who are suffering or struggling on that team. And that's where team synergy comes in, because it's all connected. And psychological safety is one of those terminologies that not everybody is familiar with either. And so just to understand it, it is feeling like you can come to work as your whole self. It's feeling like you can say what you need to say and feel what you need to feel without any punitive action. And that your voice is heard regardless of what opinion you might have. And that discourse and disagreement is part of being a better and more effective team and organization. And that can be really difficult to manage when you, as a manager yourself or as a leader yourself, have your own high emotions in place. And so you have to know that you're ready to give psychological safety so that people can receive it. And that can sometimes be a challenge.
Listening to all this, I don't know how any leader could be a good person in their personal life, because they have to work so hard at work to put everyone else first, to kind of hold that space, to point people to the future, to kind of be authentic, but still manage their own feelings. There's a lot really that we're asking of leaders here. And so I guess my question now is, what advice do you have to help those leaders or managers, which is almost even tougher because you don't sit right at the top, but you're in that manager space. Like how do you pull this off when really we're asking you to do so much?
I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
What I'm going to say is, I know it's unusual for me, but very direct. And the answer is, deal with your shit. That's the answer. Deal with your shit. You want to be a better leader. Leaders, and I'm just going to tell you this from a psychology point of view. Leadership is parenting. If you don't like the way your people are behaving, you're a shitty parent. Deal with your stuff. If you don't deal with your own stuff, you can't manage anybody else's. There's too many leaders telling people what to do who've never done the work on themselves. People will say to me, "Oh, do you recommend a therapist?" I'm like, oftentimes, no. And they go, "Why?" Because I don't know many who've done the work.
Yeah.
Just because you have the information, i.e. emotional intelligence, or just because you're DEI, or just because you know conflict resolution, or just because of whatever the title might be, doesn't mean you understand it.
Yeah.
Understanding it only happens when you understand your own emotional source code. What's in your emotional DNA? How are you looking at the world? If you don't understand your own perspective and your own biases, how are you going to help anybody else? So the answer to your question, Darren, is deal with your shit. And you'll be much better as a leader, as a human being, as a parent, as a partner, as a friend, whatever it is. And that's not easy, folks. I want you to understand that. That takes gonads. That takes courage. That takes curiosity. The willingness to question the very thing that is unquestionable to you, which is your identity. If you can't question that, you've not done your work.
Yeah.
And if you've not done your work, you're not really going to serve. You've merely got a title. And you might be pissed at me for saying that to you right now. And you might go, well, screw Dove or whatever it is. I've got this. Fine, you can say all that. I'm okay with that. But I'm still telling you that work is what's going to bubble up to the surface over and over again when dealing with your children, when dealing with your partners, when dealing with your business associates, when dealing with those that you are supposed to be there to serve. That's honestly the answer.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to add one thing. It just reminded me of how important it is to just take a pause. And it's not a moment of nothing. The leader can take a pause. There are many times I remember like people, at the door lined up. I'm like, what you have to say is really important. I didn't have to explain what I was going to do, but I needed like that 15-minute, let's do it in 15 minutes. And whether it was that I had to walk around the block, because I had to deal with my emotions first of what was happening. And then I can listen to them without judgment, without trying to persuade them whether they're right or wrong, where I was really going to listen to them. But until my head stopped, all that stuff in my head was speaking loudly at me, I needed to quiet it and just manage it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're kind of saying both things, right? You have to deal with your shit in a big way. And also right now, like right now, in the next 10 minutes before you go in and essentially be a parent for your organization. And it's still the opposite direction of what you think you're supposed to do. You're a manager. You're just asked to do everything all at once. And I just have to focus on what I can get done. As a leader, it's like, I got to make the right choices. I got to make the right decisions. I got to get stuff done. Well, actually, we're saying like, you got to go in the other direction if you haven't taken care of your shit first.
Exactly.
I'm really leaning into the expression, aren't I? Well, hopefully that's not a problem. Michelle,
I guess I've been a bad influence here.
Yeah, that's okay. Michelle, Brian, any further advice for people about, that what we're talking about here is really just dealing with your own stuff so that you can show up in this very challenging role because a lot is being asked of you. If you don't take care of yourself first, you're not going to pull it off.
Michelle, I'll follow you.
Well, so for me, it's like when you, I get you, Dove. I'm all about it, and I'll also say people don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
You say deal with your own stuff, cool, and then people go, how do I don't even know how to do that. Now the question isn't whether or not they should be in leadership roles. The point is that they are. And so part of doing that is understanding your locus of control versus your locus of influence, right? And it's not just leaders that have to deal with it. We all do. Leaders just have to manage it with multiple people simultaneously. So we all have to come to the table going, okay. And I know that I've been in and out of this trying to get myself organized in my network and stuff here with this call, which has been brutal. But I did catch Dove at one point saying, at some point you have to move on and not dwell in it, right? And not sit and dwell in it. And that is personal effectiveness right there in play. That is being future focused and forward focused, right? And understanding this is where we have control and this is where we have influence. And where are we going to spend and waste and expand our energies on the things that we cannot control? We can no longer control the outcome of this election is being decided. We can't control that. It's done. Our influence is when we went to the polling booth and voted, right? So the influence piece is done. Now it's the control piece. You don't have control. So you have to move into acceptance if you want to move forward in a positive way. And it doesn't mean blind acceptance. It means, how can you move into acceptance in which you still feel like you're personally effective and you still feel like you can have an outcome, and you understand that you're not here. We talk about, don't judge, don't judge. Look, we all judge, and we're going to judge. It's not about don't judge. We are judging Trump supporters. We are judging Kamala Harris supporters, right? Depending on what side of the fence that we're on, we're having these feelings and emotions around it, and we're telling ourselves stories around it, right? The idea, though, is to say, okay, where do I draw the line between letting this eat me alive and helping me to move forward and move my team forward? And so I can't say I'm not going to judge you, because somewhere back here I'm going to judge. Back here, it's your behavior. You change your thought process and you change your behavior. Tell yourself a different story, give yourself a different mindset about your employee, about your team, about this discussion. And the outcome, you're always working from the outcome back. What do you want? Do you want this team to be positive? Do you want it to remain trusting? Do you want it to remain a team that is cohesive and is going to ensure that the goals are met that day, that week, that month, that quarter? Or are you going to let it all go to hell in a handbag? And that's really up to you. It doesn't mean you can't judge and have your own opinions. What it means is think about your mindset and coming in for the outcome that you want out of it, and look at being forward focused and help your team members get to being forward focused, right? Otherwise, you run the risk of being toxic, of not being effective. You run the risk of losing relationships. And this is something that we haven't had a conversation about yet, is once the election results have come out, people now see people in their own circles that they thought they knew, realizing that they voted a different party than what they had expected or what they had anticipated or thought. And these are the relationships, these community relationships. We haven't talked about community, right? Yeah. These community relationships that you have with your own network and that you have with your own neighborhood, this is what's at stake. This is the piece that can turn teams, neighborhoods against one another. Is we have to figure out, how do we maintain the fact that, you're right, Dov, we want to make sure that there's food on the table. We want to make sure that there's bills paid. And we also know that we love our children. And we also know that we want the best for that, right? Like, there's things that do bring us together, and we have to truly focus on that to make sure that we don't become so divisive that we can't be friends with or communicate at any level with people who think differently than us. It's not healthy, because we need one another. Yeah,
that's great. Well, I want to invite people to keep coming up with some questions in chat. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in there right now, and we'll try to get to them. But I think you brought up a really interesting question. Was here I'm managing a team or leading like an organization, and I see realignment in my teams from kind of an emotional, interpersonal perspective because of this election. How do I respond to that? Like, what should I be attempting to do as community starts to morph and change because of what we just have gone through?
There's something that for me comes up when I'm dealing with people deep in their conflict, that before we can even get into whatever their conflict is, and usually what they've presented it is, it's not that. There's layer. That's the top layers. I have to get to the bottom layers. But before that, I have to get them to agree on something. And what I mean by that is not on their topics. I get them off of, well, you're both here.
Yeah.
We want to find a solution. They're like, but there is no solution. No, but we want to find one. And we're going to dig deep until we find it. Don't worry, I don't know what it is either. And they're like, you don't? I'm like, no. But we both want to be here. Yeah. And because both of you are disrupting the office, you're disrupting the team, and we want to find a solution. So just digging to find what can we agree. Hey, we both want to still work at this company. Yeah. I know it seems like we can't get along right now with someone who voted opposite of me. I don't need to prove whether you're right or wrong. Right now, we just have to have some purpose that we both agree we're seeking. We're going to find a way to get along. We don't know what it is. Might be hard to get there. We're going to get there.
brings you right back to that shared purpose of your whole
Yeah.
thing, the reason that you're there in the first place.
You've got to find unified meaning. To Leslie's point, if we don't find unified meaning, you might as well move on anyway. It's fine, right? But it's finding that unified meaning that's bigger and more important than my political views or your political views or the vote we took. But what's the unified meaning here, right? And once you understand that that's what pulls us together, the fact that you wore a red hat or I wore a blue hat or I wore a red hat and you wore a blue hat really matters far less than we are doing this because X matters. And we're dedicated around X. You know, there's a lot of talk around diversity. And one of the things that in my work with companies around the world, is I'm constantly saying, you need more diversity, but not the kind you've been told you need. And they go, what do you mean? You need cognitive diversity. You need people who don't think like you. If you don't get people who don't think like you, you can learn. We were brought in to work with a global organization. We were working with this team in France where they flew everybody in and we were working with all the executives. And I said, what's the biggest problem? I'd done this in advance. What's the biggest problem? You know, we got a general consensus. Okay, this is the biggest problem. Have you solved it? I wanted the biggest problem that they'd been struggling with for a while. Have you solved it? The answer was no. And I said, you brought me in, but I'm bringing somebody in. And I'd arranged this. And they said, okay, who are you bringing in? And I said, okay, welcome this person. And this person was a choreographer for a very big business problem. And I said, this person is a choreographer. This person has no background in what we're going to solve today, other than I told them that I'm going to bring you in to help us solve a big corporate problem.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a dance and it's not working. Show us how to choreograph it so that it works. Suddenly, nobody's thinking like an executive anymore. That cognitive diversity of understanding that this is a dance suddenly changes everything. We need more cognitive diversity because the problem is you're bringing people in who are of different colors and different ethnicities and different multitude of genders or whatever the hell it is, but they're all trained to think the bloody same. And so the fact that you're wearing a dress and you have a beard is irrelevant because you're still thinking like the guy who's wearing the khaki pants and the blue shirt. It's the thinking that's the problem, not the external diversity or even the cultural diversity. It's the cognitive diversity that we need that allows us to be bigger, that allows us to go, wow, I never thought of it that way. Oh, Brian, the way you see this is so different than the way I've seen it. Oh, Michelle, you see it that way. I never even thought about that. Leslie, oh my goodness, I never considered conflict that way. That is brilliant. Now I can understand it.
Yeah.
That's what we need more of.
Yes, and I think I agree with you, and I'll also add to that cognitive diversity is not something that is normally awarded without what you see first.
No, I'm not saying it isn't.
And so when you
see
see the guy with the beard and a dress, and you see the guy who is a different color than you or a different race than you, you're not often asking them to come to the table and give them their cognitive diversity because of, right? And that's where the bias, that's where the problem is. Yeah, it's like, yes, we can talk about that, but the first bite is with the eye, and your first bias is with the eye, and that happens before someone opens their mouth. And so for me, that is where the inclusion, the diversity, the equity, right? Diversity is a numbers game. Okay, like we're a group of people here today talking in a panel, and we all have our own thoughts and ideas and opinions and background. And for me, you can turn around and say, this is exactly how this organization is cut up in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of race, and that's amazing. The question is, who has a voice at the table? And we're so busy wondering who's at the table that we're not asking who's not at the table. That is what inclusion is, right? And that is where you get your diverse opinions and your diverse thoughts, because more often than not, we don't invite the people who don't look and seem like us to get their cognitive diversity and understand that they have different lived experiences and backgrounds and histories and ways of thinking. And therein lies the issue. And therein lies a lot of the fear, right? A lot of the fear of, I'm going to go towards the person who I feel more connected with and ask them how they are, versus going over to somebody who doesn't look like me and asking them who they are? Versus what does it feel like to go up to a Muslim coworker and say, how are you feeling about this election? Right? It's not something that we'll automatically just walk up and say. But if we remember, in the last Trump administration, the first thing that he tried to do was ban Muslim travel. Does anybody remember that? So it's thinking about how do we make those connections to be sincere and sincerely doing our check-ins with our employees, with our coworkers, with our families and friends, and saying, I see you. I see you. I'm not asking you difficult or politically charged questions. I'm asking you, I see you, and how are you? How are you doing?
I think we needed another hour for this this event, because we're really getting so much into the crux of all of it, which is the whole point of everything really is we're better with diversity and diverse perspectives. But taking advantage of that and creating a world where that really exists, and we have the confidence and we've dealt with our own shit enough to be able to do it, is the challenge that we're even talking about just in this very moment. But we are coming up on time. I feel like it would be a misstep of me not to invite Brian just maybe to just wrap up, since we were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then I'll put a bow on this event. And Brian, a couple of quick thoughts about where we're headed here with this conversation.
Yeah, a couple of quick thoughts. First, thank you to the panelists and the listeners. I think this is the type of provocative, thought-provoking conversations that we need. What I would offer is what a mentor of mine said, and it's been talked about by the other panelists. All leading begins with leading yourself. It happens to be a mantra that I was taught. It happens to be a mantra that I go by. So I'm starting with, okay, I can't control the laws and I can't control the government. What can I control? Who am I going to be being with in the next conversation I have with my colleagues? How I'm going to be listening to them. Watch for the words, the language that comes out of my mouth. Am I using dehumanizing language, which makes it easier for us versus them? Or am I being present with people and listening for their greatness? And again, going back to what I said earlier, this is something to be practiced. We don't have a nice bow and ribbon around it inside of an hour. This has been something that's been challenging for our communities, our societies for decades. Mm-hmm. If we can actually start to keep walking, keep moving forward, keep talking and listening openly, I think that will be a win. Thank you.
Thank you to each and every one of you for just a brilliant event, and to being brave to step into this space, because this is, there's a lot of heated emotions right now. And I think the truth of the matter is you have to do these things in order. Really, I picture the choreographer. Basically, you kind of are a choreographer for your teams and a parent at the same time. And you're bringing people into a space to go through these emotions, to process them for themselves, but ultimately to move towards a positive solution that's a sense of shared purpose, and making sure that everybody feels included, managing your own biases and the things that might get in the way of you really stepping into that role. That's what we're talking about. It takes time, and really, if nothing else, probably just start with working on yourself and then bringing that kind of awareness and sensibility to your team, and having the courage to hold a space for people to be themselves and believe that you can get through this because you have a shared purpose, which is really your humanity and your curiosity. We do these events all the time. I'm hoping that we can have all of you back I wish we could just continue this conversation again, but maybe we will in the future. To all the rest of you, I hope that this has been an inspiration for you moving forward, and recognizing that in these times of division, there is always an opportunity for connection and growth. On behalf of Learn It, thank you to my panelists and to everyone who tuned in today.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And thank you to my fellow panelists for your wisdom and your knowledge, and everybody else. Thank you for remaining curious. Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all.